Sabrina 90s comic, issue 30. We start out seeing Hilda and Sabrina playing mini golf. Hilda compliments Sabrina on her putt, and Sabrina thanks her, having fun. She says she won a free game, and Hilda tells her that she could be a golfer. Then Enchantra teleports into their back seat, making Sabrina scream as she says that she agrees. Why was she spying on her? And this time, Salem's nowhere to be found. She sure likes Sabrina. She tells Hilda to drive and put on the air conditioner. It was smart of her to not warp into the car while she was driving and risk a crash. And it was nice of her to compliment Sabrina's potential. She says that as she's sure Hilda knows, her centennial golf tournament is today. So she happened to be spying on Sabrina at this point, and found out she was a great golfer because of it. Why was she spying on her before she knew she'd be golfing though? I guess she really wants a daughter? How did she know any of Salem's adoptive family would be involved in golf? How did she know to start spying on that specific golf area? Hilda says that she was planning on watching the golf tournament on Witch ESPN. So the witches have their own version of interdimensional cable, where presumably the TV waves are teleported to their TV. Enchantra interestingly reveals that she's being challenged by a tricky demoness queen, Repulsa. A demoness? Really? I'm guessing that'll just be a pointless word and she'll be portrayed as just like Enchantra, and it won't really matter. Then she should have just been called Witch, or Troll. Good thing this comic stays lighthearted and comedic most of the time, or at the very least, tongue-in-cheek. Because having demons in it could be begging for stories that take themselves too seriously. Having demons just because there's witches in the show is why I never gave Charmed a chance. It's easier for me to accept a series where the witch is the main character if it's about her having a mundane, realistic life, for the most part. Because it feels like she's mostly just another run-of-the-mill, relatable person, instead of having to be swept up in this big, epic, tense drama fighting against evil villains all the time who target her just because she's the main character. Which seems way too fictiony for me to take seriously. No, instead Sabrina is a normal teenage girl with a relatively relatable life. It's not like she has to fight demons or vampires on top of being a witch, which was already hard to swallow. At least Enchantra's rival queen being evil as well means that I'm not sadly wishing her rival was the head witch instead. Somehow, when Enchantra says that she wants Sabrina to be her caddy, they're surprised. Even though Sabrina stupidly risks her turning into an animal by saying she's got a life, she gets warped to the other realm anyways. Zelda reassures Hilda that it's not her fault, and they start watching the ESPN channel, taking more uneventful panels than necessary to get to the actual tournament. I guess the eye in the background of that starry sky is really a witch watching them, because if it was literally what it looked like, you wouldn't be able to survive space. An alien talking to a microphone states the obvious, welcoming the audience to the Other Realm Country Club. Because apparently there's only one country club in the entire realm. And our Pulse is a goblin, not a demoness. Good. And she's from the Nether region. I hate how that sounds. Did the writer realize the innuendo in that? He couldn't have. Why did he get away with that in a kid's comic? Did we really need to see all this dialogue from him? We already knew the tournament would involve all these characters. We didn't need it to be recapped to us. Sabrina sees that Repulsa is going with her usual troll goon, which Sabrina's intimidated of. And as a challenger, Repulsa goes first, using a 20-pound mallet for the mini-golf. The mini-golf tournament allows that? So naturally, Sabrina asks Enchantra if they cheat, and Enchantra says that if it wasn't for cheating, what fun would it be? This is perfectly justified here instead of breaking the story, because Enchantra is the head witch. She can get away with cheating. And she's right, the story wouldn't be interesting to watch at all if there wasn't any cheating. It's like a racing story. It'd be insanely boring without cheating. I wonder why Enchantra doesn't use magic to kill Repulsa if she hates her so much. She even uses magic to make the green monster eat her. Somehow she spit out with no injuries from his teeth after Skarnock performs a Heimlich maneuver on it. I guess Enchantra intentionally keeps Repulsa alive and in her current position as a queen, because if she just killed her or turned her into a flea, she wouldn't be able to do this to her anymore. She wouldn't be able to compete with her in golf anymore. And maybe no one else will be brave enough to do that. So maybe part of his spell here was that it wouldn't actually hurt Repulsa. Also, I presume goblins speak English, so why would Repulsa's parents name her that? And if it's because they hate her, why didn't she change her name after she'd inevitably be mocked for it? It turns out there's a rule where you can't cast the same spell that was just cast on you. I guess to make things more interesting. But Enchantress didn't cast a spell on Repulsa. She cast it on the monster, but I guess the rules are general like that. I was really impressed that this comic had so many appearances of Enchantress. And she's interesting and entertaining enough as a character that I love every appearance instead of getting sick of her like Eggman. Anyways, this rule was clearly made to make sure the tournament wouldn't get repetitive and boring to watch with the same spell being cast over and over. And yet there's no rule against Enchantress doing that in the first place. So how is it actually cheating if apparently the abuse of magic is actually expected? Enchantress complains about her cape for some reason I can't understand because it's just one panel. Sabrina says that the first bit of advice she can give her is fashion advice. And she uses magic to make her wear modern golf clothes. And impressively, Enchantress isn't angry and offended at her, and instead says excellent. I guess the reason that she didn't predictably have Sabrina golf instead of her after she brought her here for golf skills was that it was her golf game. And she couldn't have anyone other than Enchantress be the golfer. Still, it makes it seem pointless and confusing that Sabrina's here. She's just going to be the caddy giving advice and not someone to play the golf for her. Enchantress said she can't concentrate because she's smart enough to predict that Repulsa is going to put a hex on her. Sabrina tells her to just line up her shot, and then it turns out that she had made sure that her conjured up outfit was coated with spell repel, which hurls incoming witchcraft back at the sender. And it works against Repulsa too, hitting her with lightning. So that means that the magic of goblins is classified as witchcraft too. So why don't either of them always have spell repel on them? Sabrina tells Enchantress a nice hit, and then the ball gets bigger, because Sabrina didn't cast a spell on it too. Sabrina says they'll be crushed, and I hate the yellow guy for talking too much when he's just stating the obvious. He says that Enchantress and Sabrina have been eliminated, and he recaps to the audience pointlessly. And not even a way that actually explains what happened, so what's the point? It was nice of Repulsa to shake hands with her caddy though. I don't buy for a second that they're dead, and of course Enchantress magically lifts up the golf ball because of her witch power. And Sabrina's still in a good mood as well, and says that Enchantress did a hole-in-one. Enchantress says that a newly updated rulebook says that any ball eaten by a giant gator is a 5-stroke penalty. And when Repulsa doubts that, she gets smacked by the book. Wait, why is Zelda rooting for Enchantress? I guess we're supposed to assume that Repulsa is much worse than her, when we barely see her do anything wrong because she's just a new character. But she didn't have the pet the dog moments Enchantress did. Sabrina gets threatened as well, and then her family panics as the yellow alien says that they'll be right back to this live coverage after the ads. And it completely cuts past the fight, as in the very next panel, he's welcoming the audience back. Why would they cut away from the fight? Why wouldn't Sabrina get punished for holding back Enchantress from her enemy? Why is Repulsa being held back too? The alien says that that fight means the tournament now comes down to a one-hole playoff, where no magic is allowed, just now. And they're moving on to the toughest hole ever, on a long fairway with several quick stand traps leading to a gap, and if the ball goes over the edge, you go with it. Repulsa hits the ball with a scythe, and according to an obscure ancient rule, that means she doubles her distance because she chopped the ball in half, putting her on the green. Why would that rule exist? That's stupid. Why is she allowed to use a scythe for a golf club? She hates her breath, and she tells Enchantress to put a little English on the ball. We see an old-fashioned speaking person on the ball hit away by Enchantress, and he pushes the ball into the hole, presumably being tiny enough that nobody sees him. Wouldn't cameras? I guess no cameras are put here specifically so that Enchantress could get away with using magic on a no magic playoff, and so that's why she's fine with the no magic rule. She doesn't follow it anyways. Then don't write him to say that no magic is allowed. This is more interesting to look at than Enchantress legitimately getting a hole-in-one and impressing me, which was more predictable. Enchantress sends Repulsa away as she wins again, and Sabrina says "aw" when Enchantress humbly admits that she couldn't have done it without Sabrina. And the story ends with her family being proud of her, and Hilda not being very surprised that she did good. The story's already over? It could have shown Enchantress being inconvenienced a lot more than that. We could have seen a lot more magic than that. She turned Salem into a cat. In the next story, Sabrina tells Salem that she won a goldfish at a carnival. What is she thinking? He's a cat, so of course he wants to eat it. She says that it's her new pet, and Salem's somehow surprised by that. And she asks where that glass bowl is. Wasn't it common sense that she shouldn't bring home a fish when she has a cat? She pours the water into a fish bowl, It makes Salem jealous because she calls him an affectionate nickname that he always hated. Out of complete and utter nowhere, the normal fish jumps out of the bowl and spits water at Salem as Sabrina's leaving the room. At least Sabrina explains why she's leaving the fish alone. Harvey's picking her up and taking her to the pet store. She should explain that the reason she has faith in Salem not to eat the fish is that she thinks Salem loves her too much to do that. Impressively, she immediately looks back at Salem and calls out his name, actually hearing him talk behind her. If this was a Sonic comic, she wouldn't have done this. But how is the fish back in its bowl? It obviously wouldn't have actually landed back in the bowl. It's a magic fish, right? Sabrina puts Salem out of the house, calling him a bad kitty because of his jealousy. She tells him to not even think about messing with her goldfish, and goes with Harvey as to wonder why the hell she won't put a force field around it to protect it. Maybe it requires her concentration, which she couldn't have all the time with Harvey. Salem's dialogue is nonsensical here. He says he demands equal time and says, "I'm accusing." Then Harvey asks if her cat is okay compassionately. Then Salem sees the water drained from the bowl because it had a crack, and he panics because the fish he wanted to eat is dying. He teleports himself into the room with it. I wish he explained that he's saving it despite knowing it might regret it, because he doesn't want Sabrina to blame him for what'll happen to it. It was sweet of him to call the fish kiddo, but why did he have to be written to slip on the water and break the bowl after that? Now we're on his side when Sabrina's inevitably gonna blame him for everything that'll happen. She wouldn't blame him if he used his magic to fix everything, like a smart person. A short time later, she gets back, and she sees the water all over the floor and broken bowl because Salem didn't fix it all. I get a pal for Gary flashback to how she's treating Salem. Well, that's an exaggeration. Fortunately, the writer proves he knows what he's doing compared to that, because Sabrina believes him. He got the fish in the jar just in time, which he's holding right in front of her so she knows he's not lying, which explains why she believes the story. And the writer's even smart enough to cut past Salem explaining everything to her. She thanks him and apologizes for jumping to conclusions. Salem inexplicably says the fish isn't so bad when he gets to know him, when he can't talk to him. Then the story ends with the fish spitting water on him again, being needlessly cruel when he just saved his life. In real life, cross-species animal friendships happen a lot, and usually the cause of it is that one of the animals saved the other one. In the next story, Hilda says she's doing laundry, and tells Sabrina to start thinking about her school wardrobe. Zelda reminds her of her homework she's been relatedly putting off, and Salem reminds her about his litter box. So she's naturally fed up with all the nagging at once, and offends them by saying that's not time to go back to school yet, because she still has summer things to do, like sit by Cooper's pond. Fortunately, it's explained that she's in denial. She complains that she has so many chores at once, and life gets so complicated sometimes. And then she sees a pixie drinking nectar from the water lily bloom. Well, I guess if witches and leprechauns are allowed to live on normal mortal Earth, I shouldn't ask why pixies would too. Sabrina wishes that she could flutter around and have fun all the time. And Salem's sent to go get her and screams when Sabrina disappears. Wait, why was someone sent to get her instead of her just being teleported home? This whole story wouldn't have happened. He grabs a sample of pixie dust and brings it back to her aunt, who want him to stay here. Zelda says that witches and pixies have been feuding for eons, apparently. They're vacuum armed in case the pixies try to swarm them. Hilda says that a paintball pistol is a pixie's worst nightmare, as opposed to a regular gun with bullets. That sure is nice of Hilda. She could have explained that they're bulletproof and can't be injured at all, and yet they can't remove paint from themselves. So an attack on their vanity would be a lot worse than getting hurt. One of the aunts says that she told her she should have warned Sabrina about pixies years ago. And the other aunt says that she somehow thought she'd learn about it at mortal school. I assume it's Zelda on the left, but it's hard to tell. Meanwhile, Sabrina complains with Fairy Wings that the pixie never told her she'd have to apprentice in a sweatshop pounding pixie dust out of magic lint balls. She's told to keep quiet, and is told that she'll be a pixie slave for the next century. Why not? Forever while they're at it. I guess Sabrina's magic was deactivated by a more powerful magical person than her. Because otherwise, I have to wonder why she didn't immediately warp back home. Then the pixie is satisfyingly shot with paint. It would have been a boring story if Sabrina literally just flew around and drank nectar as a pixie. I was expecting that to happen and for her to get bored of it. That'd be a more natural progression of the plot than the pixie being a monster for no reason. Sure, fairies are evil in mythology, but why? How did Sabrina's aunts know exactly where she was? How did they warp to a place they never saw before? I'm glad this plot hole is really rare in this comic. But still, we should have seen them stare into a crystal ball to see the place first and then warp there. I guess they did that. Surprisingly, the pixie surrenders immediately. And we immediately cut to Sabrina being normal size again. Well, I'd rather things be anticlimactic and make sense than not. Hilda tells the pixie to tear up the oak leaf contract. And they warp Sabrina home where she doesn't want to see a speck of dust anywhere after all the pixie dust. So what's stopping... I guess the pixie is just that scared of the witches simply putting paint on her again if she comes back and threatens Sabrina. It does make sense that the story was ended in one attack. It's impressive of her to be so accurate and competent with her shot, and it'd be so stupid of the pixie to want to keep it up after that. But she could have missed and we could have seen a magic duel between them. What was keeping the pixie from using magic on them just because she was sprayed with paint? It should have been explained that the paint was magical. I guess the powers of pixies are much more limited, and that's why she needed the contract in the first place. This issue was by Mike Gallagher. The first story was about Enchantra hiring Sabrina as a caddy because she happened to witness her mini-golf skills because she was spying on her for no explained reason. The cheating with magic made it interesting to watch. And it was justified that they could get away with it because they're both the leaders of their respective countries. It had some sweet moments because Enchantra was nice to Sabrina, didn't get mad at her for stuff like changing her outfit, and gave her all the credit for her victory. And Sabrina was nice to her back. The second story was a frustrating one where Sabrina has the dumb idea to bring home a pet fish. So of course Salem wants to eat it. But because that'd be too dark for this comic, instead there's a creative twist where the bowl had a crack in it and Salem saves the fish for Sabrina's sake. And fortunately, Sabrina believes him and forgives him. That was all good, but the part before it was frustrating because Sabrina was mean to Salem and never called fish out on spitting water at him. I prefer if she saw that. The third story is about Sabrina getting enslaved by a pixie because she wanted to have fun as one, and the pixie was inexplicably a racist against witches who wanted to enslave them. Well, to be fair, witches are omnipotent, which would terrify a pixie into wanting a leg up on them. And I have to assume that Sabrina lost her magic as a pixie, and that's why she didn't solve the situation herself. I guess pixies only have the powers to do that and fly, so they're scared of witches. So Sabrina's aunts save her, knowing how to warp to her for no explained reason, and are merciful enough to spray the pixie with mere paint, causing it to surrender in one shot. So, I have to assume it was impossible for Zelda to warp Sabrina home after she was enslaved by the pixie. But she could have warped Sabrina home and not just sent Salem to get her. I wish it was explained that she didn't surrender because of the paint, but because she knew that if she didn't surrender, there was a lot worse that could be done to her after the paint ran out. Instead, I'm expected to believe that paint of all things is the pixie's worst nightmare. Wouldn't it be everyone's worst nightmare? Considering that the pixies are like this, I really have to wonder why they're allowed to live on Earth. At least witches try to live normal and conspicuous lives, because they're not allowed to interfere. I assume pixies are invisible to mortals, unless they're psychics, or they would have been found out.